After surviving the console wars of the 1990s,
The Bit War veterans are invading your podcast
to bring you gaming intel
and old tales.
Together, we are your hosts, Max Inventory
And Yao Tei Ching.
and we are the Bit War Veterans.
Thank you for joining us on another exciting episode of the Bit War Veterans podcast. We will be talking about our time in Video Game Alley in the Yongsan Electronic District in Seoul, South Korea.
We'll talk about another trip that we took to ComicCon this year in Seoul.
And to wrap things up, we'll share our Twitter responses and Facebook responses to the question, if you had one odd, rare, or obscure gaming piece of hardware, what would you want?
So between that and our visit to Techno Alley, we're going to be talking about a lot of consoles.
A lot of rare and odd things you might not have heard about. So this is a great episode if you're into that sort of thing, if you're a collector, if you want to learn more about the history of gaming hardware, especially things that did not come out in the United States of America. Max Inventory and I found ourselves in Seoul one day.
I had handled some business at the base up there, so we didn't have a whole lot of time to mess around up there, but we were able to discover this hidden little area called Techno Alley.
And that's in the Yongsan Electronics District area of Seoul.
And wow, did I feel like we landed on a video game mecca.
I felt like I was on another planet for a while.
I think that's a feeling that happens in Seoul. Anyways, no matter where you go.
So we took about a 20-minute walk from Yongsan Army Base. We came to their electronics district. Now, it was really cool because as soon as you walk through this tunnel that takes you underneath a subway and you come out, you are there.
Walking down the street, seeing all of these store shop fronts full of electronic junk spilling out into the streets in totes and racks. We're talking old printers.
Lots of old cables, keyboards.
Mice. Knockoff professional gaming looking mice. You know, Ethernet cards. Just junk everywhere, right?
Right, and like there's tons. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of these little computer shops. I mean, you could probably find absolutely anything you wanted for a computer there. They're all very tiny, jam-packed with stuff. People are selling stuff on the sidewalks. And I have no idea how any of these places stay in business at the same time.
And I don't think we even covered the whole ground of that electronic area.
Oh no, I think you could probably walk around there and visit all the stores and you could still be finding new things even a week later. It felt very cyberpunk. So while we were walking, we were trying to find this video game alley that we've heard about. It's not exactly at an easy to find location, so we ended up walking through a couple of buildings first, where they had lots of new computer parts, keyboards, everything with shiny LEDs. I mean, there was a store selling like drones and stuff there, and like electric scooters, those little hoverboard things. Nevertheless, we got lost at first, and it took us a while to find Video Game Alley because, well, it actually is like a little alley. It's kind of hidden in between two tall buildings, and you access it by going down the sidewalk. And you'll find kind of like a slope or stairs going down. And you have to go there. It's not exactly clearly marked either. But when you do, and you walk down there, you start to see vendors in like a little underground strip. There's, I don't know, how many vendors do you think were there? Maybe 20 different vendors?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, maybe around 20.
Yeah, about 20 different vendors in this little underground strip, and there were a few other vendors that were selling video game things not in this location, but...
Right, that's how we knew we were getting close, too.
Yeah, we started to see a few more video game stores.
Well, particularly older video game stores.
Yes.
Because they even had, you know, the Sony PlayStation stores around there. There were some that seemed to exclusively be selling newer or current console stuff.
Yeah, we started
sniffing them out.
Yeah, we started smelling those old games.
I was sniffing, you were smelling.
Yeah. Eventually we found the place. Unfortunately, we arrived there a little bit later in the evening when some of these shops were closing. So we did not actually get a chance to shop and look at every single one of these stalls that were there. But there were still a good handful that were open, and there were still people down there. So we definitely got a good chance to look at everything.
When we say everything, there's no way you could actually see everything, though, because every square inch of this place is jam-packed with stuff. They're not too fond of you taking pictures in public, so we did what we could. And every time I look at them, I swear I spot something new each time.
Yeah, so just imagine you're walking down an aisle, and on the left and the right-hand side of you, there's a bunch of different vendors, and they have stacks of video game consoles in box, display cabinets with consoles and games and accessories on display. And I mean, some of these people just had things stacked up on top of each other, on top of more stacks of games and systems and things like that. It was absolutely insanity. I've never seen exactly something like this before.
So let's begin with the strange, the unusual, the rare, the oddities.
The expensive. So the console market in South Korea in the 80s and 90s wasn't as prevalent as it was in Japan. So to my surprise, there was actually a lot of Japanese imports in South Korea. And it's like as you looked at older and older things, it was mostly Japanese. And as you looked at more newer games and consoles, that's when you could actually start to see more things in Korean, because most people were into building their own PCs and doing PC gaming.
It was also very difficult due to old rivalries for Japan to push their products. So let's kick off with the first piece of equipment I had not seen in person before, which are the PC Engine Duo, the R and the RX, which in the North American, I believe it was the Turbo Duo, released by NEC Hudson Soft, which integrated the TurboGrafx 16 and its CD-ROM drive into a single console. So this was kind of your best of both worlds when it comes to TurboGrafx 16. When that released in North America, it was around $300, and they even offered pack-in games and coupon books to try to drive sales, along with gifting us the terribly awesome Johnny Turbo campaign.
Oh.
And if you haven't seen those ads, you must look them up if you haven't.
They were comic book style ads, and each one was a couple pages long. They picked like the absolute worst mascot to sell their system. It looks like a 50-year-old lumberjack who gets into a hero costume and tries to sell you Turbo Duos.
And some of them even had strange innuendo, did they not?
Yes, they did. Especially the very last comic.
Yeah, you want to look those up. Johnny Turbo.
Johnny Turbo.
And just on one countertop, there was 3 of those boxed next to each other.
A lot of the consoles we saw that were in box were in very, very good condition, and it looks like the shop owners took the time to actually re-plastic wrap them. I found that very surprising. Like, there were so many things in here that collectors would absolutely love to have in their collection.
Well, this country does have a lot of moisture all throughout the year, and so I think they do that to help combat against any molding issues or mildew. So even things that weren't in box are wrapped in plastic. But still, that's a lot better than going to, a thrift mart or a junk mart or a boot sale or something, and they're just laying around and
it smells like grandma's basement.
turning yellow. So right next to those were also boxed Mega CD drives, and one of them had a picture that it included a Sega Classics arcade collection, and for some reason, a picture of a Super Nintendo controller. This is one of those things I didn't even notice till looking at pictures afterwards.
Yeah, it made me think maybe this was not the original box, and someone had a box printed, and
I don't know.
But yeah, it's like the box for the Sega console.
And it is Japanese.
It is in Japanese, and then with a Super Nintendo controller on it. Like, what?
I don't know. I guess it's possible it slipped in there between the box and the plastic.
Like, maybe it's one of those weird bootleg systems. I don't know.
On the same countertop, you also had a Japanese Wii U, which I'll tell you this. Throughout our time here, we've seen piles of PlayStation 2s and Xbox 360s. Tons of Wiis, too. One thing you don't see a lot of is Wii U's. And we also have the Neo Geo X Gold Limited Edition, which included the Ninja Masters game.
The Neo Geo X Gold Edition comes with, the Neo Geo X handheld, a docking station for it that actually looks like a Neo Geo console, which is pretty cool.
And an awesome arcade stick, which is basically like a remake of the full-size original Neo Geo arcade stick.
Yeah, and that would plug into the dock so you could play your Neo Geo X on TV with the arcade stick. Ooh.
It also had 20 built-in games. And in handheld mode, you had a 4.3-inch screen. And from what I've seen, maybe not the best battery life, but still, it seemed like a really cool system to have on the go. Later on, they released a 5-volume set called Neo Geo X Classics. So you had your 5 game cards there with 3 games on each for a total of 15 games in addition to the 20 it came with. As far as I know, that's all that really came out for that. I could be wrong. Now, the next strange piece we spotted was the Panasonic Q. What you know about the Q, or the Game Q?
So you might know this as the GameCube with the DVD player in it that was released only in Japan. Nintendo had a partnership with Panasonic to make GameCubes that played DVDs, and these things look so cool. I saw it in box, and I mean, the box was in great condition, and I went, oh my gosh, I really want one of these, but these consoles are region locked, so I don't own any Japanese GameCube games, so there really is no logical reason for me to get one, but this is something I really like to have in a collection. So let me tell you about it. Now, it is a cube, but it looks a little bit bigger than a normal GameCube because, of course, there's room for a DVD to go inside. And instead of having the disc tray on top, it slides out like, classic disc trays do. This thing is silver. It's made out of stainless steel, and it has silver controllers that go with it, too.
Gray silver.
Okay, gray silver. Okay.
And it came with one of those and the DVD remote control.
Yes, and it's able to output 5.1 surround sound. Now that's really cool.
Now, along with its body shape, it also had some funny legs on the bottom, so it required its own special Panasonic Q Game Boy Advance player.
Not a lot of these were made. I think these were only in production for about 2 years in Japan, and they were canceled because they weren't selling well.
Surprise. It was also pretty pricey at the time.
Yes.
And they canned that in 2003, so it probably, like you said, had about 1 or 2 good year run on it.
These things are really big collector's items.
In one of these display cases, I saw some strange-looking, almost V-shaped red consoles, which actually turned out to be the CPC-51, the Zemix V, as in victory. They were released by Daewoo, a Korean company, if you've never heard of them, in 1988, and they were available first only in red and black, and then after that they offered a few more colored versions, black, blue, yellow, whatever. It has only 1 cartridge slot, and it's not possible to add a keyboard like most of the other MSX models. However, next to it, we saw a golder...
a golder one.
However, next to it, we saw a golden version with what looked like 2 cartridge slots. It was a little bit bigger. And this was in its own display case in the display case. And next to it, it was a golden keyboard in a separate enclosed display case. So I'm not sure what versions those are. I really, I didn't dig super deep, but I couldn't find anything about that.
Maybe some kind of special edition? I don't know. But it looked like it was very rare. If you're interested, let us know.
Do you remember the Dreamcast had their little visual memory unit that plugged into their controllers?
The VMU.
Well, they definitely had some of those there. But what's even more difficult to find, and something I had not seen in person, the Sony Pocket Station.
This was a Japan-only release. Surprise, surprise.
I recall reading about it in magazines, I don't know, in like the 6th grade. But unfortunately, yes, it never made it over here.
Now, I know someone who had one imported, and they also had a PlayStation that I don't know if it was a Japanese PlayStation or just modded to play Japanese games. But they had one of these PlayStation Pockets, and they played it with the game Chocobo's Dungeon. And I remember them telling me you could program your own, dungeon, basically. Like, there was a little dungeon maker section of the game, and you could port that dungeon you made to the PlayStation Pocket. And you could kind of take that with you and play like a miniature version of the game on the PlayStation Pocket. That sounded kind of cool.
That is pretty neat, and there was probably a lot of good possibilities with this thing. And it had infrared, so it could communicate to other Pocket Stations. And I remember hearing about games where you can, interact with other people. It had a real-time clock, flash memory, and even sound. And like I mentioned, multiplayer minigames with other Pocket Stations, but sadly it never released outside of Japan, and worse yet, all the foreign versions of the games released that supported it had their Pocket Station support stripped from their US versions, or even the European ones too.
Wow, that's a hard deal for the rest of the world.
Somewhere around 2013 or something, they made like a Pocket Station emulation for the PS Vita. Too little, too late. We spotted a few in-box versions of the Twin Sticks controllers that were released for the Sega Saturn version of the arcade smash hit Virtual-On, which also happened to work with a few other mech games on Saturn. And you might kind of consider this the precursor to the massive Steel Battalion stick controller setup for the Xbox that came later down the line.
And another really strange Sega thing we saw there was not the Sega Mega Drive, not the Sega Saturn, but the Samsung Saturn and the Samsung Mega Drive. What?
These are probably the most left field consoles that I saw there because I didn't even know Samsung did this. I'd never heard of it or seen it before. I almost thought it was bootleg.
Little did we know, Samsung and Sega partnered up to manufacture consoles.
Again, they had to do it this way because it was so difficult for Japan to push their products here, particularly during the 80s and 90s as well. I'm pretty sure that's why Daewoo had to put out the MSX we talked about earlier. And here we have Samsung having to distribute
Sega hardware.
So yeah, they struck a deal, and Samsung took it upon themselves to adapt Sega's systems for the South Korean market, though for the most part, they were completely compatible with the Japanese systems, sometimes basically just the shell changed. And funny thing is, Samsung Mega Drives are not officially known as Mega Drives, but they call them Super Game Boy.
Game Boy?
Or maybe they call them Super Game Boy, but I feel like that would have a Nintendo lawsuit. I don't know. They also call it Super Aladdin Boy.
And now we're going to have Disney barking up their tree.
And yet the text Mega Drive is still on the system. One reason they called the Mega Drives Aladdin Boy is because they made like one game, a shoot 'em up, that had it was either just called straight up Aladdin or something Aladdin in the title. Another strange thing about the Samsung Saturns is some of them were released with region converter carts, which I don't think ever happened anywhere else in the world. And unfortunately, Samsung stopped distributing the Saturn under its name in 1997 due to the rough sales. And they went to another company named Kama, K-A-M-A, Entertainment, and they continued its release for a little while longer. I did not see any of those.
So another thing we saw while we were there was just the amount of consoles they had stacked on top of each other. Like, there were display cases that were just full of, like, Nintendo 64s wrapped in plastic, stacked on top of each other, next to a row of Nintendo 64s wrapped in plastic, stacked on top of each other, like 6 or 7 of them deep. And, you know, they had this for Dreamcasts. We saw
Famicom,
Super Famicoms, like, I'm pretty sure there were PlayStations and PlayStation 2s like this.
You know, aside from the controller cords attached to the console, I really like the classic Famicom look.
Oh, yeah.
I kind of want one.
I like how their cartridges look, too, and a lot of them came in different colors, a lot more than we got here in the States.
We even saw Jaguars there.
Atari Jaguars.
The Atari Jaguars, not real Jaguars, but, you know. There was also the Sharp Famicom.
Yeah, this is something I didn't know existed until we saw one. The company Sharp was licensed to make Famicom systems.
Also known as the Twin Famicom. So this cool thing is this combined the Famicom and the Family Computer Disk System. Bet you didn't know Nintendo could read floppies at one point, huh?
Hey, don't copy that floppy. So as we're going down the aisles of this, there was also a couple of vendors that had anime figures and posters and other types of kind of play art figures. There was some random other gaming merchandise there too.
They had a lot of collector's box sets, or, you know, the bundles.
Yeah, like the special edition consoles and things like that.
I saw a lot of Metal Gear 5 stuff. Did they not have a lot of Metal Gear 5 Phantom Pain stuff?
They did.
Posters and all kinds of stuff.
I think one of the store owners really liked Metal Gear and just had a bunch of Metal Gear stuff. And another thing I saw there that I thought was pretty cool was they had playing cards that were released by Nintendo. I think these were...
They've got to be reprints.
No, they released them, I think, as special.
Oh, okay.
You could use your points when they had Club Nintendo,
Oh, okay.
and you could redeem them. And I do remember seeing a Legend of Zelda deck of cards, and they had a couple of the cards out on display, and they were pretty, and I wanted one. And then I would never play them ever.
Right. Put them in plastic sleeves and look at them. They even had a Sonic Mania PlayStation 4 collector's kit. Now remember, those actually were kind of rare. They only produced a certain number of those, I think. But one of the strangest and most unique bundled limited edition box set console runs that I had seen there was the Crystal Xbox pack with 2 clear Xbox S controllers, and of all games to have packed in with it, Hop Spin, a tennis game.
And this was all in Korean, too. So this was not an American or a Japanese thing. This was a Korean system. Now, the really interesting part about this was I tried to do a little bit of research on these special edition Xboxes. From what I could find, they don't actually have a number of these things released. So there's no way to actually know how many of these were produced and then sold. And then on top of that, I was only able to find that it was sold in North America, like the United States and Canada, and Europe. There's no mention of there ever being a Korean release of this. And I found that really strange, because here we are staring at a clear Xbox that's in Korean. So this thing might actually be really rare, because I could not find any information about this. It was see-through, but it kind of had, I don't know, what would you describe it? It kind of had almost a slight, maybe silver, bluish...
Crystal?
Yeah, crystal, like Crystal Pepsi or something.
I mean, they're calling it the Crystal Pack, and I'd say they nailed it.
And the information I found about the North American and European releases of this did not mention Top Spin being a pack-in game. So
No. Yeah, it said usually it came with both Fable and Crimson Skies. Nothing about Top Spin.
Right, so this is something I really would like to investigate more. Maybe pick it up if the price is right.
I'd also like to know, if I'm going to guess, there's a Japanese region lock. You know, doesn't Asia kind of have one region lock, or is it? Do you know if it's split up between like Japan, China?
You know, I know Japan is NTSC. I don't know if South Korea is typically NTSC or PAL.
I don't know, but I'd be willing to buy it.
Even if you can't play games on it.
No, this may be a system to just hold on to and let it gain some value over some more time. There are just so many things to see here, there's no way we could capture it all, but I mean, boxed 32Xs.
I think there were a couple of arcade machines there. I don't know if they were for sale or not, but I do remember seeing at least one, maybe even two.
There were.
Yeah.
There was, I mean, just accessories for pretty much everything. They had CRT TVs. I don't think those were for sale. I think that was so maybe you could hook a console up and test it before you buy it. Dreamcasts, Mega Drives.
And just boxes of games. Like, it seemed like each vendor had a couple of like containers full of games ranging from Famicom to, you know, some of the latest PlayStation 4 and Xbox releases.
Yeah, Game Boy Advance. They had every iteration of Game Boy there. SPs, they had PSPs, the PSP Go's.
Oh yeah, I remember those things. And they had a lot of Japanese titles as well, retro and new.
We even saw this really cool Link doll that I had never seen before.
Yeah, lots of video game figures. Some people were even selling amiibos. We did pick up in one of the stores a Japanese version of the Majora's Mask Link.
Twilight
Princess Link. And if we had a little bit more money to spend, we would have picked up Zelda too.
Toon Zelda.
Yeah, Wind Waker Zelda.
They had a few of the other ones from Breath of the Wild that we hadn't seen here.
They had boxes of all the different flavors of Nintendo 64 that they released.
Yeah, we saw quite a bit of those.
There was even one store that had some video game vinyls, soundtracks.
Lots of arcade sticks, new and old. One strange thing I saw in the pictures after the fact were these weird-looking Super Nintendo wireless controllers called Elefly. I don't know, ELEFLY.
Elefy. I don't know.
And they also had turbo switches on them, and they just look horrible.
They're not your typical controller shape. They look like
starships from the old Battlestar Galactica.
Which is funny because the box that they came in shows these two controllers, and it looks like they're flying through space.
Zapping invisible laser lines back at the wireless pickup thing, infrared pickup, however this works. Even when you search for those, you don't find a whole lot.
The one vendor in particular really liked Rocky. He had a bunch of Rocky stuff.
Rocky statues, a big Rocky statue, like bootleg DVDs. This is probably another reason they don't want you to take too many pictures there.
So we did make one major purchase while we were there. Remember on our previous episode, we talked about the bootleg entertainment system mini that had like 600 something games in it, and we were playing stuff like Mario 10 and Mortal Kombat.
On Nintendo.
On Nintendo. Well, we found a guy who was basically selling those bootleg systems, but they were under different names. And they had a couple different kinds. So we looked at what he had, and we settled on the Cool Baby.
600 games in one.
Yeah, it looks like the NES Mini. Pretty close, except for the controllers, which, at first it made me do a double take. Because these controllers, they are shaped and colored like the classic NES controllers, but instead of the A and B button, they have 4 buttons there.
Top that, Nintendo.
It looks so weird. Like, it just made me double take. Like, am I drunk? Am I drunk on soju? No, there's 4 buttons on this controller.
It is definitely what drew me to it.
I mean, it really looks bootleg at this point.
We love this stuff. We love it. And it wasn't expensive at all.
No.
Like $40 or something.
And it had the 600 something games that included, the Mario 10s and 6 and Mario 9 and
the games that don't exist games.
Yeah, games that don't exist. All these crazy ROM hacks and like reskins of other games. It's just so bizarre.
I mean, we figured, hey, of the ones they get right, it's got to work well enough. Nintendo emulation isn't that hard.
And the ones they got wrong, oh boy, did they get wrong.
They're hilariously wrong, and they're so fun just to boot up and laugh at. So we pulled the trigger, we got it.
Now by that time, we have made our way to the very back of Video Game Alley, and unfortunately, most of these stores were closing, and people were clearing out. And we passed up the very last vendor. It was this old man who was standing there, probably waiting for us to leave.
Who was also clearing out. His bowels.
So we got out of there quick.
We go up. Was it right after we had turned around to start heading back the other way?
Mm-hmm. He gave us kind of a mean mug, and we turned around, and then we heard...
The sound of this man...
it sounded like he
crapping his pants, pretty much.
It sounded like he would have to check his pants. Like, it sounded awful.
Oh, my God.
So we knew it was time to leave.
Oh, yeah. And plus, we had to look at each other and make sure that neither one of us did it.
I don't think I would be capable of doing that.
But no, I was... What a great send-off. Let's put it that way. So once we found out that ComicCon was coming to Seoul, we absolutely had to go.
We'd never been to a Comic-Con before in the United States, and the fact that this was happening in Seoul made it even extra special for us.
And it's the second time that they have come to Seoul.
Yeah, Comic-Con is still very new here in South Korea, and when we went there, I guess you could say it kind of showed.
Yeah, it was a little smaller than I expected, but...
That's fine. I mean, you gotta start somewhere, right?
They still had a lot going on in such a small space. Now, unfortunately, there wasn't anyone on the panels that they the day we were there that I really even knew of or cared about. So there wasn't any cool presentations that we got a piece of, but we saw a bunch of amazing cosplayers. We definitely saw other Europeans and Americans there. That was nice.
Yeah, there were a lot of foreigners there, as the South Koreans would say. There were even a good amount of English comics and books there for sale, which was pretty cool.
Yes, because I still haven't found a good source for American comics out here yet.
That was one of the first booths we went to. It was kind of a larger vendor selling a bunch of different kind of books, and to our surprise, a lot of them were in English. And so that's when we picked up a couple of really neat things. One of the things we got was a hardcover comic book of all of the Overwatch comics that was released by Dark Horse.
Really nice little book. And it's great to have all those in one place instead of the PDF files on the internet.
Right.
And there was definitely some I had not seen.
And some of the artwork is just absolutely beautiful on that. And they're all, really short, a couple of pages each. They all tell maybe one story, or there was a couple of them that kind of go on for 2 stories, but they're all just kind of one-shots about each character or some of their backstories before they joined Overwatch.
It's very entertaining and well done overall. Overalls. We also picked up a beautiful guide for Zelda Breath of the Wild. Now, not that we really need a guide for it, but I just couldn't pass this up.
It was hardcover, and I believe it was like the special edition guide.
Yes, this was huge and had smothered in beautiful artwork.
Oh yes, this guide is absolutely a work of art in itself, and it's very, very thorough. I mean, it's really thick too. But on top of that, it gives you all the locations to like the Korok seeds and all the other little tiny things in the game that would probably be very difficult to find without a guide.
Time consuming. That's the main thing that we just have a deficit of lately. That's another reason I got the darn thing.
And then we got another Zelda book, and this one was a real treasure. We saw it and we're like, oh, we absolutely have to buy this.
There was no question. There was no price. Well, I guess it could have been.
$1 million.
Yeah, but
it was the Legend of Zelda Encyclopedia Special Edition. And what made this thing absolutely so cool is that the book looks like the shiny golden Zelda cartridge, and it even comes with its own sleeve. Like, NES games would go in those little black plastic sleeves.
Protect the dust.
Protect from the dust. But this book is absolutely enormous. It has everything you would need to know about any Zelda title in this book.
Minus Breath of the Wild.
Minus Breath of the Wild, right.
But that's okay.
That's okay, because we got the guide.
We also found out, once we opened it up, it has an instruction manual.
Yes, the book has its own instruction manual. How ridiculous is that? But it's great, because they treat this book like you just bought a game. So it's hardcover, very thick. I don't know the exact amount of pages, but trust me when I say it's very thick. Hundreds of pages. And it's gold and it's shiny, and the cover even has, kind of like that raised, it's like raised in parts. So it kind of looks like the cartridge and feels like the cartridge. And it's made by Dark Horse. So, props to Dark Horse for making all these cool things lately.
That was published by Dark Horse?
That was published by Dark Horse.
Oh my goodness.
Right.
It's stunning. I recommend it for any Zelda fan, absolutely. It goes right along with our Hyrule Historia.
And the Arts and Artifacts book that we own.
Absolutely.
So this makes the Triforce of books.
Pretty much. Now, I'm not too enthusiastic about the new Star Wars comics, but I do like what they've been doing with the Vader series, and I was able to get the Vader hardback collection there, and another graphic novel Vader series, which are pretty entertaining.
And I went and bought some, don't laugh, some Adventure Time merchandise. I couldn't help it. They actually had a really big Adventure Time booth there from Cartoon Network, and they had life-size statues in this giant inflatable Jake with Finn riding on top, and I bought a little BMO case and a BMO passport cover, so, I could trick out my passport.
They had a lot of floor space. I'm guessing it's pretty big here.
And we also got some really cool enamel pins. And I went with the Imperial logo from Star Wars. And Mr. Mac's inventory got... what Rebel logo did you get?
There was Gold Leader.
Oh, you got Gold Leader, right?
And the old Jedi Order logo.
Okay. Well, there were a number of booths with Korean comic book artists and their own independent artists. Now, I'm not very familiar with like the Korean comic scene, so unfortunately...
Not at all.
Yeah, unfortunately, I really didn't know what they were selling, and, I couldn't read it anyways. But it was nice that there were tons of like local talent there.
Lots of toys.
Oh my goodness.
Or like also statues, rather.
Right. Figures, statues, Lego models, Gundam kits, you name it, they had it.
And this beautiful little Sonic section.
Yes.
You remember that?
Oh, of course I remember that.
I know, because I bought a little Sonic.
You did buy the little Sonic.
He's almost the size of an amiibo, a little bit bigger.
Yeah, it's a classic Sonic.
That's right.
Wasn't he doing that pose, the...
Standing there wagging his finger.
Yeah, wagging his finger.
Can't catch me.
No. And we saw some very beautiful, very expensive Dragon Ball Z statues. Lots of Overwatch. Of course,
Blizzard had its own
Blizzard.
section there.
Yeah, Blizzard,
Of course.
was out of this world with the amount of statues and very expensive statues they had for sale.
Genji, Diva. I always want to call her Sniper Wolf. What's her?
Widowmaker.
Widowmaker.
Sniper Lady.
Yeah.
And then there were also things like we saw Mega Man statues, we saw
Yeah, Devil May Cry.
Devil May Cry statues.
Dante killing it.
Dante, Star Wars, and then since this was Comic-Con, of course there were statues of like Batman, Punisher.
Huge Star Wars Lego Star Destroyer.
Oh, yes.
A couple other Lego Star Wars setups, and had some First Order Stormtrooper statues.
They also had the 501st Legion.
The Korean division.
The Korean division. So if you don't know what that is, the 501st Legion is a group of Star Wars cosplayers all over the world that are named after Darth Vader's 501st Legion, like the most elite stormtroopers and things. And they do mainly stormtrooper cosplay, but of course any type of cosplay is welcome.
They have a dark and light side too.
Yes, they do. And the cool thing about them is they hold their cosplayers to very high standards. So you have to have, basically near movie quality cosplay. And since they're a worldwide organization with great cosplay, they also do a bunch of conventions, they do charity events, they go to children's hospitals and cheer up kids in the hospitals. And
It's a real stand-up organization if you haven't heard of it.
so it was very cool to see the South Korean division there. And they had like replica lightsabers and weapons on
Beautiful
display.
stuff.
Yeah, absolutely beautiful.
Right out the movie.
Yeah, like I'm telling you, this stuff looks like it came from the set of the movies. They were that good. Of course, it being Comic-Con and all, there was tons of Marvel stuff there.
There's a nice big Marvel Cinematic Universe section there, showcasing the movies. Big Iron Man statue.
They had the Infinity Gauntlet on display in a big case.
A big inflatable Thanos.
Yeah, a giant inflatable Thanos. And there were a couple of other inflatable heads.
It was like Hulk's head.
I just remember an Iron Man being there. I don't know. I think they had like an inflatable Lego Baby Groot. Like, what?
No, that was a guy in a suit.
That was a guy in a suit.
Remember dancing around?
There was an inflatable Groot there, I swear.
All right, maybe there was.
Okay.
But there was definitely a guy dressed up as Lego Groot, and he looked fantastic. It was a big Lego inflatable Groot Deadpool.
That's what it was.
That's what it was.
At one point, they had a Fear the Walking Dead panel going on. I think there was someone there from Fear the Walking Dead, maybe one of the creators or somebody.
There was a booth thing there where I
think
think they were showing off clips from the new season or something like that.
I'm not really interested in that, but
That's a negative.
at one point when they were done with their clip or whatever they were doing, they had a zombie crawl around the expo. So anyone who was dressed up as a zombie walked around in the zombie crawl, and they had people from AMC there. Some of the cosplay we saw was great. The one that comes to my mind first off was a group of 5 people that were dressed as Lucio. They were all Overwatch. So it was Lucio with the frog head costume. They had Mercy, they had Tracer, they had Anna, and they had Sombra. And they were all top-notch cosplayers.
And they weren't the only ones. They just happened to be grouped up at this one point.
Yeah, I did see another Tracer, and I saw another Lucio there.
Our first impression when we were walking in was a person dressed in a giant Warhammer Space Marine suit.
It was, I'm not super familiar with Warhammer 4K.
Me neither.
Or 40K, but it was the Space Marine that was like in bright yellow.
I don't know if that, I think that's maybe a custom paint job, but...
I think it's from the game.
Yeah, maybe it is.
And there were a couple of other Space Marines there in just gigantic cosplay.
Yes, they look great.
Yeah, really good.
Very imposing. I don't know if the scale is accurate, but... they had giant features. There was Diablo cosplay. There was...
Spirited Away.
There was the ghost things from Spirited Away. We saw like 2 different ones of those running around.
Yeah, like no face.
No face, that's what it is. Plenty of video game cosplay, like some fighters from Tekken.
I saw Chun-Li.
There was this couple going around that I didn't get a picture of, but I wanted to because it was adorable. One was dressed as Drake from the Uncharted series, and the other was dressed as Lara Croft from Tomb Raider. That's awesome.
That makes a fine couple right there.
I know, right?
Right.
And trust me, they wore it well.
And there was a Breath of the Wild Link. And of course, tons and tons of Marvel cosplayers. We saw many different Spider-Mans.
Doctor Strange.
There were Deadpools. I saw a Wonder Woman. Okay, I know she's not Marvel, but we're just naming other things. Wonder Woman was there. Miss Marvel. An Iron Man. Batman.
He was walking around with the Joker, but I didn't take a picture of the Joker because he was that Suicide Squad version of Joker. No, thank you.
More like the Noker. There was a group dressed up as Akatsuki from Naruto. Back to comic books. There was a group that was Guardians of the Galaxy.
Right. Gamora and Star-Lord.
There was a Thanos who had sunglasses on, like, deal with it,
Boss Thanos.
Yeah, and even some really silly cosplay. Like, I saw a guy dressed up. He looked like he was doing a Thor cosplay, but the armor was Pokeballs, and he had, like, a Pikachu hammer, and he said he was Pika Thor.
Yeah. It's like he had a Pikachu cowl and cape on, too.
So overall, we had a really fun time at ComicCon Seoul. We bought some cool stuff. We took tons of pictures of cosplayers. All of the pictures and things have been posted on our Twitter in the past, so you can scroll down and take a look at that if you want.
But 2 of the coolest things that come out of that was Wacom had their drawing tablets on display. And somebody...
Not me.
May have bought one. They were offering quite the sale, on top of being a little cheaper due to the dollars to won conversion.
I ended up getting one of those cool little Cintiq tablets.
Well, it's not that little.
It's medium-sized, okay?
It's a really good quality tablet. And on the other end of the convention, they had a video game area set up. So I wandered over there, and yeah, there was a huge section dedicated pretty much just to Fortnite. Like rows of computers set up for Fortnite.
Woo.
Yeah, big deal. But I found myself meandering over to the SNK Neo Geo Mini section. And while she was playing with the tablet, I got to sit down for a few moments and play the Neo Geo Mini that they had set up on TVs.
So this is like a mini-size arcade cabinet with 40 Neo Geo games in it. So you could play a single player with the cabinet by itself, or you could attach controllers to it, USB Type-C controllers, and play co-op, which is great because most of these games, if not all of them, offer 2-player modes.
Due to that experience, we have actually bought a Neo Geo Mini.
We got the Japanese version because the international version has not been released yet, but they're out over here in Japan and South Korea and other places in Asia.
And yet they are still difficult to find. So we got lucky coming across one in bundled with 2 controllers and the HDMI cable.
And the controllers are even harder to find than the system, so we had to pull the trigger on that.
This is kind of like the NES Mini all over again.
Right, there's like shortages of these things everywhere. Scalpers are hoarding these things, and we were very lucky to find one.
So if you search Bit War Veterans on YouTube, you can find our channel. You'll see our logo there. And watch our unboxing and initial impressions video. However, we haven't had a whole lot of free time to spend with it yet. So we'll give you our more in-depth thoughts later on.
Yeah, we've only had this thing for a few days.
But all the SNK reps were great. The experience was nice. I got there kind of at the end of the convention, so I didn't have to wait in a line or anything to play. It was a great time. So ComicCon Seoul, it was a great way to spend a day. We had a lot of fun, lots of wonderful cosplayers, lots of different things featured, more than just comics. I hope to see it grow since I'll be here next year, and I look forward to attending it again.
And now it's time for our Twitter segment. I asked our followers on Twitter and Facebook if you could own any rare, odd, or obscure piece of gaming hardware, what would you have in your collection? And we got a ton of responses. And some of these things were so rare and obscure, I had to go searching the internet for information about it.
This is the way you become part of the show, and man, you guys teach us, I think, a lot more than we teach you, that's for sure. We don't teach anybody about nothing. So let's get right into it. Starting with @Space Captain Zemo. He talks about Time Traveler. He first saw it years ago in Los Angeles when he was visiting his cousins. His cousin told him, you can't play it because it would steal your soul if you lost, and that you'd be trapped in the game forever. And he wants to prove him wrong. Now, Time Traveler, once I looked it up, it clicked in my memory. I had taken a trip in California and San Francisco in the 90s because I got family out there. And I actually got to play this thing at who knows wherever the heck we were. And my brother and I thought, man, this is the future. So it's a hologram game. It's a big machine, but it has a tiny little spot on it where it projects the image. I don't remember much about it, but you were a cowboy that went through time and had to save a princess. Basically, that's about it. Surprisingly, this thing was made by Sega. It was on a laser disc inside the machine. And I think it was designed by the guy who made Dragon's Lair. And eventually in 2001 or something, they released a PC version. And if you bought it, it would have a red-blue display, and you could put on those goofy glasses to try and mimic the 3D-ness to it. I might have to see if I could download that.
Now, I had never had the chance to see one of these things in the wild, but I've seen pictures of it. It's not like a standard arcade cabinet. It's big and white. It kind of looks like a washing machine. I do know that if you're in the Midwest, United States, Galloping Ghost Arcade in Illinois has one. I do know that, so go play it. By the way, Galloping Ghost is a gigantic arcade, and it has, like, everything.
I think it's one of the largest in America and has, just a door charge and unlimited plays, isn't it?
Yeah, you just pay something like maybe 15 or 20 bucks at the door, and you are free to play anything all day long. Now, our next tweet comes from CD Mega, and the gaming piece of hardware he would like is the Iowa CSD GM1 Mega CD. It's basically a radio boombox with a built-in Mega CD. And that's exactly what it is. It is a boombox released in 1994 in Japan. And it's kind of like this cool blue color. It kind of almost reminds me of Mega Man, but it's this
Mega Man boombox.
Yeah, it's a boombox, with a radio, cassette player, and at the bottom, it has a CD player too. Of course, it's the Mega CD. It plays Sega CD. Hello, Sega CD games. And at the very bottom, you could also put in cartridges, and it came with a really cool blue and black controller.
The controller itself is almost a reason to get one.
And of course, these things are very rare. They were only in production for about 1 year. Poof.
At Punk Rock Bob, don't do the heroin Bob. He wants a Nintendo PlayStation. It solved the problem of having to decide if PS1 or SNES is the best RPG machine of all time, and Secret of Mana would have been completed without gutting 60% of the script to fit it on a cartridge.
And we had a lot of people saying the Nintendo PlayStation. We also had tweets from, I'm gonna mess up your name, Acrasiapaz? I'm so sorry.
Acrasiapaz.
The Super NES CD-ROM prototype would have been interesting to see what games could have been developed for it.
Pieces of Bits would have loved to own the Nintendo PlayStation, the ultimate what-if console that almost was.
And Binary Atlas would have loved to own one too. And they also said, the system that almost was.
I mean, who wouldn't? And, he brings up Secret of Mana. There were other games planned for that system before it was canned, like Chrono Trigger. Thankfully, it didn't suffer the butchering. Speaking of that system being canceled, I would almost bet money that story is the reason why PlayStation and Nintendo won't have crossplay these days, going all the way back to the betrayal that Sony felt when Nintendo stabbed them in the back and said, yeah, we're going to work with Philips.
Nintendo and Sony had plans to release a disc system for the Super Nintendo, and literally overnight, Nintendo decides they're going to go with Philips instead, and well, we all know what happened with that. But I did some research on this, and it seems as though there is one prototype that has ever surfaced, ever. It is believed that the prototype is actually just the shell, the plastic casing, that there's no real hardware inside of it. Yes, it was uncovered by someone who worked at Sony who was cleaning out an old closet or something. And there's only one in existence, and it probably doesn't work. So this is probably the holy grail of rare gaming stuff.
This is the kind of stuff that makes me want to be some kind of computer or electrical engineering and work for the R&D teams and get access to those rooms. At Jericho Atomic says, I'd probably go with Commodore 64 just because classic is bloop.
And then we also had a response on Facebook. We do have a Facebook, folks. Please follow us there. From Michael Wachowstan saying, it's not really an odd system, but they would still want a Commodore 64.
I used to have one. I scoured the basement. I couldn't find it. I don't know what happened to it. I wish I still had it.
Yeah, these things sold a couple million units, so they're not exactly rare.
It was a great product for cheap.
Yes.
It really is.
It really brought home computing into the homes of millions of people, when before some of these other home computers were just way too expensive.
And it was a good gaming machine, but you could also do other things on it, like programming. Very basic programming.
Now we have Benderman 42. He would love to have the original Xbox prototype, but he'd probably have to build an extra room onto the house to store it.
Do you remember when they showcased that thing?
That thing looked like an anvil.
Yeah, made by Acme.
You could forge a sword on top of that thing. It was a giant X, and this thing looked like, I don't really know what the dimensions are, but this thing looked like it was 3 feet by 3 feet by 3 feet, this giant X-looking thing. It did not look like a video game console. It looked like
It looked like a parody of a video game console.
It looked like the Borg.
I wonder how much of that was even practical, or if it's just a shell they made to
wow people
wow
at
the audience.
conventions. Yeah.
I remember seeing it in the magazine, there's no way that's going to be the actual thing.
I know. The original Xbox was kind of a beast, but this thing...
Yes, it was.
But the prototype, whew, yeah.
Out of control. Mm-hmm. At Mr. Coin Laundry says the Luigi's Mansion arcade cabinet.
Well, we got good news for you. We got to play one. We talked about it in our previous podcast.
It was so fun.
Yeah, it was an extremely, extremely fun experience.
I felt like a Ghostbuster.
Yeah, it was really cool. You could listen to our previous episode and hear all about it there. At Chaos Hawkins said he would own the rarest and most expensive console, like the 24-karat Wii or something, so he could sell it and get a good vehicle. Because in this situation, I've been given a miracle gift and I'm going to use it to further my life. I know that might be anti-collector of me, but I'm just poor. Now that's interesting. You would want the most expensive thing ever in order to sell it.
Research price point was $481,250.
I wonder if it would still fetch that price today.
Brother, forget a car. I'd buy a house with that.
Yeah, I would buy a house and a car and still have money left over.
At Richard Troop has a little list going. Commodore Max, Apple Pippin, Nintendo Virtual Boy, Epoch Super Cassette Vision, Entex Adventure Vision, and an Atari Jaguar CD.
So the Commodore Max was a predecessor to the Commodore 64, and it was released in the United States and Germany in 1982, but it didn't sell very well because Commodore had the VIC-20 on the market at the same time, and people preferred those systems to the Commodore Max machine. So it was quickly discontinued, and it has become rare and obscure ever since.
So the Apple Pippin is the one and only home console released by Apple as they tried to break into the market in about 1996. I think this thing had like 4 games. I don't know.
It had a very small gaming library.
I mean, the idea is that it was an Apple computer in a console for you to play Apple games on. It was bad. Had a bad controller. No one liked it. It cost way too much.
Yeah, so it was a partnership between Apple and Bandai.
Bandai!
They thought they were going to sell, almost 1 million units in its first year, but they only sold maybe a couple 100,000. Ouch! Within the next year, Apple and Bandai parted ways, but then the system sort of came back to life. Later on in 1996, a company called Katz Media from Norway bought the remaining stock from them and made Apple Pippin machines that were more or less distributed to companies, kind of for like information systems and like shopping mall directories and things like that. So
totally the intended use.
Right. So this was never actually released. The Katz version was never released to the public. This one's even rarer than the already rare Apple Pippin, and you could tell the difference because the Apple Pippin original one is like a white beige color that every computer was back in the 90s, and the Katz version is like a dark gray, and I think maybe only something like 500,000 of these ever existed, and even less were bought by companies. So once again, very rare.
Big old paperweight. The Nintendo Virtual Boy, do we really need to say anything about that? The failed, barely 3D system put out by Nintendo, somewhere in between Super Nintendo and right before the launch of Nintendo 64. This thing really did only have like 8 games released for it.
I remember playing one of these at a Toys R Us. I remember the Wario game on it, which is probably one of the only decent games released on Virtual Boy.
Yes.
Now, I know someone who told me, I don't know if they were just bluffing or not, but they had a Virtual Boy, and they said the first time they played it for like 3 hours straight, and when they pulled their face away from the Virtual Boy, they blinked a tear of blood.
Now, I believe this.
I mean, that's why the system was just black and red, because it makes your eyes bleed.
This is almost like a story that was dead on arrival. They knew they weren't going to follow through with it. I don't know why they even followed through and put it out. I guess too many wheels were in motion, so they couldn't stop it, but...
Absolute disaster on Nintendo's part.
It's one of gaming's greatest disasters. I played one in Blockbuster on display, and I felt like my eyes were going to bleed. And, yeah, it was a disaster.
Alright, so the next was the Super Cassette Vision. So this was a console that was released in 1984 in Japan and a couple of countries in Europe. The downfall of this machine was Nintendo. So this was released, I think, in the middle of the year, 1984, and we all know what happened a little bit later that year in 1984.
I was born.
And Nintendo released the Famicom. So this little Super Cassette Vision was, at the time, about to take 70% of the home Japanese console market share, which is pretty amazing. And then Nintendo came out, and then everyone forgot about this little machine. Altogether, it only sold about 400,000 to 500,000 units until it was quickly discontinued around 1987.
Games on cassette tapes was right before my time. I never really got to use any like that. But I think it's a neat idea.
The NTEX Adventure Vision was a console like mini arcade cabinet, kind of like how we were talking about with the Neo Geo Mini. So it was released in 1982. It also ran on little cartridges, and you could play 2 players on this thing. Now, the really interesting part about this is it used the same technology that the Virtual Boy did. So it created a stereoscopic image by, I don't know the exact technology, but I know it has to do with like reflecting light off of spinning discs to create
little
these,
mirrors.
Yeah, like mirrors and things to create these 2 images to create a 3D effect. The downfall of this system was it ran on a bunch of batteries, and it was kind of loud because of the spinning discs inside of the system, and it didn't really have a good battery life. So this thing was portable, but because of that, it didn't really take on very well. There were only about 4 or 5 games ever released for it, and it was only in red and black, very much like the Virtual Boy. Part of me thinks Nintendo might have looked at this Adventure Vision and said, hey, we could do this but better, and they really didn't. Well, it was only released in 1982, it was discontinued within a year, and only about 50,000 units ever existed.
And next on Richard Trope's list is Atari Jaguar CD, which I would assume then he has the Atari Jaguar base system. But when it came out, it was the thing you saw advertised but never knew anybody who had one. And the one and only game that always made me think, man, I'd love to have a Jaguar, is they had that Aliens vs. Predator vs. Marines game. Looked so cool for its time, but boy, when you look back at it now, it's pretty bad.
Yeah.
I would recommend watching the Angry Video Game Nerds videos on that one.
Yeah, the toilet bowl looking add-on. He said it looked like a toilet bowl, and it kinda does. So, you know, like many consoles in the 90s that failed, with their last gasping breath of air, the developers said, let's make a CD add-on for it. Yeah, that'll really sell this failing console. No.
Had 64 bytes, man.
Do the math. 2 people that really wanted the Sega Neptune.
At Fist of the Wind says maybe that Sega Neptune prototype that was floating around. I can't recall, but I thought someone actually found one. At Diabetic Toyota responded to him, said, I've seen one at the National Video Game Museum in Texas. Now, it's possible that it was just a shell, but the plans for the Neptune were interesting, but probably a bad idea, and good thing that it never came out.
It was a Sega 32X, but in its own console. So not the little extra add-on to your Sega Genesis or Mega Drive, but, you know, a whole separate thing. But the development on this took so long and was so troubled that by the time this system was kind of ready to get released, the Sega Saturn was going to come out.
The Saturn, which the Japanese were developing and not really communicating so much with the American branch about what they were doing. And they were just like, yeah, no Neptune. We're going with Saturn. Our next buddy is at Norin Rad III. He always wanted a PS1 Net Yaros ever since he saw one in the magazines back in the day. Even now, it would be fun to play around with. Also like the black matte look of it. So this was, like he said, a black matte finish PlayStation with a matching controller. But what it ultimately was a game developer kit. I had seen it in a magazine back in the day, and I was naive enough to think that, boy, if I could shell out $600 or whatever it was for this thing, then I can make video games.
So doesn't the Net Yaros kind of have its own, like, little separate developer library of video games, too?
I think people still do use that to develop video games for PlayStation 1 and pass them around. There's forums somewhere, rest assured.
So next we have at Drivel, TBH, and he would want to own an Initial D3 arcade machine, one of his favorite games of all time that cannot or should not be experienced any other way.
And actually, they've got a lot of them around here. They seem to love
Yes.
Initial D in the arcades that we've been around here so far.
Yes, so Drivel, if you ever go on vacation to South Korea, come to an arcade because there's probably an Initial D machine here. You could almost guarantee it.
It's a cool anime. I never got too much into it, but I had a buddy who was. At Round of Toast, what's the Panasonic GameCube? He waited too long with the hope in his heart for a UK release. And at Chappie422 also wants a Panasonic GameCube.
And Peast Kron wants a Panasonic GameCube. It's hard to get one. If he goes on eBay, it's usually a seller from Japan that sells them, and it costs an arm and a leg. We talked about this system a bit earlier on in this episode, how we actually saw one here in Video Game Alley.
Inbox, closed, sealed.
Sealed! I don't know what the price tag was.
No, we're going to ask one day, though, because,
Yeah.
man, I don't know if we could leave here knowing on our conscience that was sitting on a shelf here.
I really love the idea of a little GameCube that could play DVDs.
At Snoop Scotty Dog, he would love a Next Cube, a black computer in the time of beige boxes that looked like the future.
So the next cube was a computer that was made in the very early 90s, and it was designed to be a multimedia workstation computer for really, really rich people. And I mean, you had to pay upwards of $10,000 to $15,000 to one of these things.
Holy chow.
Yeah. In 1990, what could like $10,000 get you in a computer? Let's find out. Well, the base model of this thing, because you could actually buy expansions, so the base model of this came with a 17-inch grayscale monitor.
That's huge back.
Well, yeah, that displayed at 1120 by 832 resolution. Whoa, that's almost high def. So it ran on its own operating system, so it was like the next operating system. It wasn't like
Who needs Windows,
Windows
man?
or Mac or whatever. The CPU was a robust 25 megahertz. Oof.
That thing is catching on fire.
It came with a whole entire 16 megabytes of RAM. And you could expand that to a whopping 64 megabytes
Holy
of
cow.
RAM.
Now, I would have guessed 12 megabytes of RAM, so you're already blowing my mind here.
Oof. It came with a hard drive, depending on what kind of model you got, a 400 megabyte, 1.4 gigabyte, or 2.8 SCSI drive. Whoa!
Watch out for that SCSI port. It's like computers ILM was using to make movies with back then or something. At Natsuko-chian, always wanted a baby Milo DS Lite. Just seemed cool.
And this is just one of the special edition DS Lites that came out, and it was made by a like Japanese, they're kind of like a fashion clothing little mascot kind of company. And these things are pretty rare. I looked them up on eBay and they're like $500 for one of these.
Ooh.
It's just cute because the system has like, oh, what was it? Like cartoon Mario face and like bananas or donuts or something. It's just a cute little print, and they were very limited edition, and now they are collectible.
At Chaos Theory, 3D imager for the Vectrex. Never could get a hold of one for a sensible price. When he first picked up a Vectrex a few years ago, he always lost out in the last few seconds on eBay. Now they go for stupid money. At Longy Long also says, it's not as rare as a lot of these, but I'd really like to own a Vectrex. Those vector graphics are just so, oh yeah, vectors. Rubs vectors all over body.
So the Vectrex was the little tabletop, like arcade type of a system that had vector graphics.
So vector graphics were built upon a certain style of monitor and arcade cabinet technology, so it was a big deal to be able to get something like that at home.
The 3D imager for the Vectrex is even rarer and a very odd piece of gaming hardware. Now this is another gaming piece of hardware that you would wear on your face. You could almost think of the Virtual Boy in a way, but this thing actually strapped to your face. And it used that same type of technology where it had spinning discs that would create stereoscopic vector images for you.
Lord.
This one was able to display in red, blue, and green. Ooh.
Take that, Nintendo.
I was just gonna say that. These things were expensive. They ran on batteries. They were very, very loud and ate batteries like crazy. And if you turned your head just a little bit, it would cause the spinning disc to go out of balance, so then you would lose any of the 3D stereoscopic effect that you were getting. So as you could imagine, it didn't sell well, and these were forgotten in gaming warehouses all over.
At Jose Star San, wants a laser active with both modules, that or an MSX VHD player attachment. He likes old Laserdisc games.
So the Laser Active was a console released in 1993 in Japan and the United States, made by Pioneer, and it used Laserdisc technology. The Laserdisc. Whatever happened to the Laserdisc? This was like a Laserdisc player so you could watch your movies, and it also had a additional plug-in called a pack, and it allowed Laser Active to play Sega Mega Drive and Mega CD games.
That's why he wants the modules.
And the also very, very rare Mega LD games, which were games released on Laserdiscs. And there were a couple of other models that were released to support TurboGrafx 16 and PC Engine games. These things would also play karaoke laser discs too.
Can you imagine buying add-ons for your Xbox One that lets you play PS4 and Switch games?
Oh, I'd buy it for that sweet karaoke.
Jeez Louise.
This thing also had a 3D goggle adapter. I guess there were a couple of 3D laser discs made, and you could watch them with this awesome machine.
The MSX VHD player. So this was a Japanese-only Laserdisc type format that definitely did not catch on there or anywhere else, it seems. And I think there was only around 10 Laserdisc games made for this.
Oh, VHD games.
Oh, excuse me, VHD. At Nintendo PSX says he wants a PC Engine Duo R. At Ghostman Muss, he would love a PC Engine Super Graphics. That thing looks mental.
Sorry, let's read it like he would say it. I'd love a PC Engine Super Graphics. That thing looks mental.
Wow. Well, we are definitely surrounded by some of those here in our video game alley. We talked about that earlier this episode. The PC Engine Super Graphics was the TurboGrafx 16 with the CD add-on put into it.
Only released in Japan.
I have never played one. Just like the Atari Jaguar, it's one of those systems you saw advertised and never knew anyone who had one.
So the next thing would be the Action Max. So at Diabetic Toyota would want one, and so does Jeremy Klung. So Diabetic Toyota says he came across an Action Max in a box at a thrift store, but he didn't buy it because he didn't have a VCR or the room to play it. It wasn't very expensive either. And he also wants an Apple Pippin just to see what it was like. And Jeremy Klung also wants an Action Max, but warns everyone you will need a VCR.
Well, of course.
VCRs are becoming kind of uncommon and rare nowadays.
It is kind of strange. I still have one.
I don't have one,
It's
but
not here with us, but
yeah, my mom still has her VCR DVD combo. Woo!
Action Max allowed you to play video cassette games in your VCR.
They were light gun games. So the system came with a light gun, and you would set up a little thingy on your TV, and you would pop these games in the VCR. You know, they would play the exact same game every time. And the only thing that would be different each time you played was how many points you got.
Pretty much. Neat concept, though, for its time.
Only about 5 games ever came out. Just never really caught on, and because all the games were the same game every single time, like people got bored with this really fast, and it ended up not selling that well.
At Kevin Harbin says, I wish I still had the limited edition Mountain Dew green Xbox from a decade ago. But seriously, I wish one of the original hobby-built Space War controllers had survived. I remember the Mountain Dew Xbox. I used to drink a lot of Mountain Dew back then. It's probably what gave me some of the cavities I have.
And some of the brain damage you had.
And some of the brain damage. And yeah, it was really cool color green.
Now, he brings up Space War. And Space War is really interesting because it is an extremely early video game. And we're talking 1962 video game. Before video games were actually video games. So there were these computers, only a handful of these computers ever existed, and they were used by MIT and a couple of other research and college institutions. And Steve Russell developed a game for it. And this was one of the very first games ever developed for a computer, and this is also one of the very first games ever developed to be distributed among other computers. So this is a really, really good chunk of history right here. So the game was almost like Asteroids in a way. It was 2 players, believe it or not. 1962 had 2-player co-op. Would you believe that? So you could control 2 different spaceships, and the goal was to shoot each other, but you only had a limited amount of missiles. And in the center of the screen was a black hole type of a star or something. The game actually incorporated real Newtonian physics, so if you got too close to the star, you could get sucked in, or you could fly close to the star and use the momentum to slingshot yourself across the map.
So this is one of those developments that in the early days we argue about what was one of the first video games. Was it Pong? Or was it this? Was it Space War?
Oh, Space War definitely came out 5-10 years before Pong really did. Although I think technically the first one might have been Tennis for Two. which was like a tennis game made on like the old oscillator, like radar
Yeah.
things. Yeah. So there also was like a controller that was eventually made by this guy, because I guess the first version of the game just ran on the computer and it became pretty popular within the MIT computer lab, so he made a controller to go with this. And unfortunately, the controller has not survived. Space War does live on. A version of it was ported to arcades in the 70s.
At Since Spacies. Now, Since Spacies also has a YouTube channel where he does a podcast and videos. He used to work for the Sega Hotline team back in the day. You see, he has a very interesting perspective. He's a really cool guy, and I think you need to go check out his channel. So just search in YouTube Since Spacies, SINCESPACIES. And he says he'd love to get his hands on another Sega Terra Drive. He owned one once in the 90s and sold it as he was stuck for cash. Big mistake. 1 minute it's a Mega Drive, next you're writing Word docs. It was a cool concept, but flawed by the underpowered PC. So what is the Sega Terra Drive?
So it was kind of a combination of an IBM PC and a Sega Mega Drive that was released only in Japan in 1991. So it was an IBM PC, and unfortunately it was a little bit underpowered for 1991 computer standards. But you could also put in Mega Drive cartridges. So you could be playing a game and you could actually switch between like your computer programs and then put a Mega Drive cartridge in and actively switch between the Mega Drive and the computer portion of it.
What a neat little toy. It probably cost too much.
Production numbers of this thing are unknown, so it's probably very rare and expensive.
At ICT Junkie simply wants a ZX Spectrum. I used to love playing a game called Rats, even though loading up the tape didn't always work. There were a lot of variants made of this little home computer system.
Yep, it sold in the millions, so it was extremely popular at its time. There's still a really big homebrew indie gaming community. People are still making games from the ZX Spectrum.
Z.
The ZX
You
Spectrum.
must respect the Queen's English.
Oh, the ZX. I'm sorry, I'm just too American for this.
The ZX?
The ZX Spectrum! Sinclair has released a ZX Spectrum mini edition, believe it or not.
Surprise.
Yeah, you could buy them right now for about £99. I don't know how many euros or dollars that means, but probably somewhere around the same.
At Helm Taro says probably a Dreamcast dev unit. Those things are so weird.
The Dreamcast dev units are just gigantic boxes.
Beast. The Dream Beast.
Did they really need to be that large? I don't know.
Probably.
Yeah, maybe there's little elves inside.
That's how the games are made. They said it was thinking.
Oh my god, because there were elves inside actually thinking. Oh my god. So at DA Cider would like to have a Sharp X68000 with the Roland MT32. Perfect arcade conversions and incredible games with professional grade music. So what were all those letters and numbers I just blabbled out to you? Well, the X68000 was a Japanese home computer released in 1987, so it was actually developed by Hudson Soft, and it ran on its own operating system. And it had quite a large library of games, and a lot of these were arcade ports, and some of these were also originals. And for its time, this was a pretty good computer, although very expensive. Now, the Roland MT32 is a MIDI synthesizer released in 1987. This was the first time it was marketed towards the enthusiast instead of
The professional.
the professional. So with a price tag of about $700, you had to be kind of the wealthy enthusiast at the time. But anyways, this was released before there was an actual general MIDI standard. But this is actually highly sought after because since this was made before the MIDI standard, it had its own unique sound. So a lot of people like the Roland MT32 because it's compatible with a lot of older computers from that time. So you could run really good arcade ports, run it through the MT32, and get authentic sound that you can't get anywhere else.
You knew it was good as soon as we mentioned the name Roland. At Helix VR Flag says the Neo Geo original single cartridge version. He traded his original Neo Geo for the Neo Geo CD when it came out and regretted the trade from day one. Still have that old CD-ROM edition in the attic. What he would give to play Samurai Showdown without horrendous loading time.
And at Decking of Games 98 would love to own a Neo Geo AES. Why? Because it's got Giga Power! Because it's the first Neo Geo home video game system, plus it's the only 24-bit video game system.
And those were authentic arcade reproductions of those Neo Geo games at the time.
Very smooth. No matter what Sega said, you could bring the arcade home. Neo Geo actually bought the arcade home.
That's why they had giant game cartridges and cost a lot of money. Also, the CD version was a little bit of a disaster, and he's right. It was still early on, and load times were bad, and I don't think it sold very well.
Well, maybe these people would be interested in the Neo Geo Mini, because guess what? There are no load times. Hey.
I think in the last month here, I've said Neo Geo more than I ever had in my whole life. At Welly XL simply says 3DO.
So 3DO was one of the other 90s consoles that just couldn't compete.
The infamous machine released by Panasonic.
The technology for their discs just wasn't quite there yet. They didn't have a good number of quality developers on their games.
They really jumped the gun with early CD games. They didn't know how to fill the space. They thought using live action, full motion video was the way to go, and turned out wrong.
Yeah, loading times were atrocious too.
You don't know the pain of that, children. You don't know the pain. Another wonderful, delightful YouTuber.
Top Hat Gaming Man.
He blessed us with a response and said that he wants an Amstrad Sega Mega PC or an FM Towns Marty. And along with him, at Sickening Jar said he would love to see an Amstrad Mega PC in the flesh.
Big shout out to Top Hat Gaming Man. He makes absolutely excellent YouTube videos all about...
Very funny.
Yeah,
very funny man.
Yeah, all about gaming history.
He's a console connoisseur.
Yes, I'd highly recommend you watch him if you haven't already. So the Amstrad Mega PC was released in 1993 under a license from Sega. So this is kind of similar to the Sega Terra Drive we mentioned earlier. It was a Amstrad PC with the Sega Mega Drive hardware inside of it. It was released in Europe and Australia, but didn't catch on because of its hefty price tag of £1,000. And once again, a sluggish CPU. It was outdated by the time it hit the shelf. So these have become pretty rare and collector's items. And the FM Towns Marty was a Japanese-only console. It was released in 1993, so it had a disk drive, and it was also backwards compatible with previous FM Towns games. The FM Towns was a console released in 1989 in Japan.
I'd heard about the Towns Marty system. I hardly know anything about it.
These FM Towns Martys were kind of interesting because
of its cool name, the FM's Towns Marty, the Marty McFly machine.
They were in competition with early Microsoft DOS games as well as consoles on the Japanese market. Really fun side note, there's the FM Towns Car Marty, and this was built into a couple of models of cars in Japan.
Wow.
Yeah. And it came with GPS software. Well, I'm sorry, not technically GPS, but
it had the satellites up.
It had navigation systems.
Oh, my guess is you stored uploaded maps into it or something.
Yes, exactly. And you could take the FM Towns Car Marty out of the car and play it as a console in your house.
Whoa. See, it really was from the future. Marty's car?
I'm sure Top Hat Gaming Man has probably done like 10 documentaries on this. And he's probably going, oh, they got it all wrong. Yeah. We love you, Top Hat Gaming Man.
Yes. I'd like for you to throw your hat at me one day. In a fit of frustration. Let's grab a beer at a pub, eh? At Kumimono says Conix Multisystem.
This never made it onto the market. It was a British manufacturer who was developing this system around 1988 or 1989.
Why was it a multi-system?
So this was supposed to be one of those home computer and home game system type machines. the company didn't have the resources to push this thing into mass production. There is kind of a strange twist to all of this.
All right, M. Night Shyamalan.
The team behind the technology began working on a brand new project called Flare 2. And Flare 2 was bought out by Atari. And some of this technology was used in the development of the Atari Jaguar system. Don't you think that's really sad? You work on a team developing a gaming and computer system that fails, so you start working on the next iteration of it, it gets bought out by Atari, and then it fails. Their original technology was purchased by an arcade and gaming company that also made gambling machines and
bar games.
And there's also a story that Lucasfilm partnered up with Sony and had plans to manufacture this system. Would you believe that?
No,
And this
I don't.
was right around the time Sony was trying to develop the CD add-on for the Super Nintendo. So just think, if the Konix multi-system would have been successful, the entire history of gaming might be completely different as it is today.
So our boy back at home, Zero Cool, if you have been listening for a while, we had him on an early episode, and he says, I've always wanted the Nintendo 64 disk drive. Unfortunately, that crap was short-lived. That released only in Japan, was not a success, but I think it did have potential.
I don't know what the obsession was, but just, hey, we have the system that's not doing that well. Let's make it play CD games.
Well, they figured it out once it bombed in Japan. Let's not bother with the rest of the world.
I think this was a little bit popular among the Nintendo 64 development community, and there were plans for more disk drive games that never ever made it to light. There is a lot of history behind the Nintendo 64 disk drive. Maybe we'll go into that in another episode.
Also from Facebook, Stephen Hayworth says the Microsoft Sidewinder Game Voice.
Basically, kind of like the first voice chat system. It was like a peripheral you would plug your headphones into, and you would hold it down as you were talking. So please, just go to YouTube and search for the Microsoft Sidewinder Game Voice, and you will get this hilariously cheesy promotional video. I love it.
Horrible 90s marketing. Cody Curtin says, I would have my old IBM 486 back with Ultimate Doom, Wing Commander Privateer, Amulets and Armor, Paganitsu and Crows, with Windows 95 and dial-up. I had a Packard Bell.
Was it a 486?
A Packard Bell? I don't know what designation it was, what model, but it played Warcraft. Nicholas Blix says, I have always wanted the Sony Bravia KDL 22PX300. Not as rare nor expensive, but who could deny having fun with any part of the massive PS2 library?
Those were the TVs with the PlayStation 2s built in.
Cool concept. Yeah, it had a 22-inch LCD.
Count them, 3 HDMI ports, USB ports, VGA, and component inputs. Dang, some TVs nowadays don't even come with all that stuff.
I really would like to know, was the PlayStation outputting at a higher resolution than the standard models? If I came across one, I'd get one.
And we have Frank Cassell says he wants a Power Glove because it's the one piece of old hardware that became new hardware. If you attach a mobile phone-sized LED screen to it via a small Arduino board, and then boom, you have the mobile old console emulator glove. Now that is ingenious. Did you get that all? You could play games with the glove. Oh, that is so ingenious. Dude, people think of some crazy things to do with old hardware nowadays.
I would love to be on the subway with that.
But now that is like a perfect example of taking old tech and being inventive and
Making it
retrofitting
new
it.
again.
Yeah, that is just, Mr. Frank Cassell, if I get you a Power Glove, will you make one for me?
Mr. Robert Nelson says, I would love to have a pair of Tesla 2 pods from the 90s to play MechWarrior and other games in.
These were things you would find at an arcade, and they were completely closed and encapsulated pods, like the pilot chair of inside of a mech.
Full immersion. And last but not least, Josh Bergfelt says, CDI and Sega CD add-on. It would be awesome to experience all the crap CDI games on the actual console and the Sonic CD on the Genesis instead of the Gems collection. Sonic CD was incredible. I never owned a Sega CD, but I knew a few people who did, and that was, it probably still is, might be my favorite Sonic game.
And the CDI was so infamous. That was the company Nintendo partnered with.
Philips.
Turned their back on Sony, partnered with Philips to make the CDI system. And Nintendo also let them borrow the license to Mario and Zelda. We got the hilariously awful Legend of Zelda CDI games.
What, like 3 of them?
Yes, there was a trilogy.
And they're all junk.
And they were terrible.
They put out a lot of educational type games on that too.
Yeah.
My elementary school had a few of these.
Wow.
And every now and then we would be allowed to play a game on it. And they had this specific one that involved time travel, dinosaurs, and answering questions about dinosaurs.
Wow, so fun and entertaining.
I used to love it. I thought it was the future, man.
Good job, Nintendo. To wrap things up, Mr. Max Inventory, if you could have one crazy piece of gaming hardware, what would you own?
What could I say that hasn't already been said? You know, of things that are rare and obscure, I'm not really thirsty for those. But honestly, I would love, at least my current desire right now is to have a Sega Saturn and a Sega Dreamcast and to have collections for both of those systems. They were systems I never owned, but knew people who had them. I'd even rented a Sega Dreamcast when it came out. And I've always admired the catalog of games they have on there. They were some awesome gems on either of those systems. And look at now, the craze of people finally getting to play Shenmue 1 and 2 who never got to play them before.
And Sega Saturn is one of those game systems that are extremely difficult to emulate. So there's a lot of Sega Saturn games that can only be played on the Saturn.
And of course, Meow Te Ching, what system would you like to have? Or piece of hardware?
Realistically, one that I could maybe own one day would be the Steel Battalion controllers.
Okay, for Xbox.
Yeah, the mech, has the foot pedals and the joysticks and all the beep boop buttons to control a mech. Although the Tesla 2 pods do seem pretty awesome.
I'd like to rig that thing up to drive my car with or something.
I would like my car to be a mech.
Eject button.
Yes.
Well, that about wraps it up for this jam-packed, biggest console episode ever.
Yeah, we covered a lot of retro systems and hardware. So if you know anyone that loves this kind of stuff, please share our podcast with them.
There were things we had never seen before from Techno Alley. It was like just a 1-2 punch of console information coming our way. And we wanted to share that with you, just like you share with us.
So be sure to follow us on Twitter at BitWarVets. You could follow me personally at MeowTeChing. We've also been coming out with a lot more YouTube videos as of late, so please give us a visit and don't forget to subscribe to see more video content from us.
Work is going to take me away for another 40 days or so. So
Jesus in the desert.
Yeah, I'll be out there roaming around in the Korean mountains. So chances are the October episode is going to be a little delayed or toward the end of the month.
Maybe we'll have a spooky themed episode for you.
And of course, if you have any ideas, suggestions, comments, don't hesitate to hit us up on our Twitter account at BitWarVets, or you can email us at bitwarveterans@gmail.com.
We're going to plug our Facebook page. Not many people follow it, but we do have a Facebook. So if you're on that wretched site, you could follow us instead of following a whole bunch of stupid political ads. And we also have a brand new shiny Instagram account. We are BitWar Veterans on there too.
So we're just coming at you from every angle, trying to provide you with as much content as we can. We're really excited about our new YouTube efforts. Just pop BitWar Veterans into the search engine and you'll see us and our icon. Make sure you like and subscribe if you like it. We're all about making content by us, for you, the BitWar Veterans!